Welcome to What's Going On, the weekly podcast and videocast of First United Methodist Church in Yankton, South Dakota.
Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of What's Going On. I'm Pastor Katie here at First United Methodist in Yankton, South Dakota, and I'm glad you could join me for this episode. For those of you who are part of the church, you're probably not expecting a podcast this week because you know that I am out this week for having my gallbladder out. But knowing and having that surgery scheduled a little bit in advance allowed me time to record this ahead of time. So as you are listening to this podcast, I am at home recovering, but as I am recording it, my surgery is still in the future. And so thank you to everyone who's been praying and for your love and kindness and support. I say all of that again before this has happened, so I'm just assuming that I will have your love, kindness, and support. But I wanted to take an opportunity because this was not what I was expecting my Thanksgiving week to look like, to talk a little bit about our plans and our expectations versus reality and versus the reality that none of us know what the future holds. And so we kind of always have to hold things loosely. That's one of the lessons that I am learning right now. And I think is a lesson that I've been needing to learn and have been learning for quite a while. But again, this week was another good reminder. So if you kind of haven't heard, last Saturday, I had a pretty bad gallbladder attack, didn't know what was happening to me, and ended up being in enough pain that convinced me I needed to go to the hospital. And then there we discovered that I had gallstones and sludge in my gallbladder, and that probably would need to be taking that out. In typical Katie fashion, once I got the pain meds and everything, I was like, I'm fine. And did service on Sunday following. And so this will be a good little forced break for me right before we go into the Christmas season. But again, I just want to talk about that wasn't my plan. That day, I had no inclination. That's where I would have ended up Saturday night. That day, I spent the morning with my boys, and we were making robot costumes out of diaper boxes because it's what we have plenty of in our house. And sometimes I like to be creative with them. And, so we were making robots, and in the afternoon, I took Ben for a play date, and I went to Walmart and did a little bit of shopping for preparation for Thanksgiving. And, because my parents are going to come down. So I was thinking about that. We had just kind of made those plans. And I felt fine. Until after dinner, and then things went downhill, and they went downhill very quickly. And before I knew it, I was in the emergency room. And then now, not thinking looking to Thanksgiving week, this is not what I was expecting, not what I was anticipating, not what I was planning for or hoping for. Thanksgiving's going to look a little bit different for us this year now, as I am recovering. Luckily, it's not going to be like a major thing, but it still does require rest and recovery. And so there's always that sense of kind of this image we have in our head of the way things should go, how things should be, how we should be, versus what reality ends up being. And I think the more tightly we hold to this vision of how things should be, the more disappointed we tend to be when things don't go exactly like we think. I had someone very wise tell me that I often kind of should myself to death. I tend to use the word should a lot. Well, it shouldn't be like this. I shouldn't be like this. I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't behave this way. I shouldn't, apply it to the church, attendance shouldn't be what it is. That shouldn't have happened. This shouldn't sound like this when I had all those sound issues. I have in my mind what is like this perfect vision of what things are going to be. And then oftentimes reality doesn't look anything like that. Now, I'll say a lot of the time, reality will often exceed what I imagine, but there are times and there are cases where that is not the case. And how we react to that, I think, is really telling. We can either get really kind of caught up in trying to make things be a certain way. We can really get caught up in being upset that things aren't going the way that we envision them to go. Or we can hold on to our plans loosely and live in the moment, in the present, trusting that whatever is, there can be good in it, even if it's hard. I read a book a while ago called Present Over Perfect by an author named Shauna Niequist. Shauna, her father was a pastor. He is now retired from ministry. He was in a mega church and then had a little bit of a scandal, which kind of shook her whole world. But she is a wonderful writer. She has a few different books out that I'm happy to recommend to anybody. But Present Over Perfect has been one that I think about a lot, especially as someone who often has plans, often has that vision of what I would like things to be, can be very easily disappointed when things are not what I think they should be, or if I am not how I think I should be. And she, in that book, kind of really pushes back against that idea. And instead of having things be perfect or spending so much of my time trying to make things perfect and planning things down to a T, because it's a form of control. I'm trying to control the outcome of things, that instead focus on being present in the moment, being present wherever you are. And it was just really a profound shift. It doesn't seem like it should be, right? But there is something very different about having in my mind, this is how Thanksgiving is going to go. We're going to have it look this way. We're going to eat these foods. This is who's going to be there. My kids are going to eat all of the things I put on their plate and not just, a bun. And I needed to all be in that way in order for me to be happy, in order for me to consider Thanksgiving a success. This is all of the pieces that need to be in place. That is kind of that perfect mindset of like, things need to be perfect. They need to be according to my vision, or it is not a success. I am going to be upset about it. I'm going to be distraught over this. And instead, just being present. It doesn't mean that things are going to be perfect, but rather than spending your time worrying and having anxiety about making things fit in a certain way, being present to the joy, being present to the blessings of the moment, being present to the pain of the moment, because that pain will not last either. But accepting what is, and not worrying about what might have been or what could have been or what you think should have been, but accepting what is. Saturday night, as I sat in the emergency room and as we had an ultrasound done on my gallbladder, and that's when they said, yeah, they used the word sludge, which makes me feel like I've got like a swamp somewhere in my insides, but we're going to remove it, so it's going to be fine. But I just remember sitting there and I've been really kind of sleep deprived lately and tired. And I remember thinking as I waited, and I remember my husband kind of being anxious and wanting to get back home. And I just remember thinking, like, this is not what I thought I was going to be doing tonight. This is not uh, on my list of places that I would have chosen to be. But in this moment, I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful to just have this 45 minutes where I'm not needed. I'm not expected to do anything. I don't have to try to get my kids in bed or try to do with this or think about these things. In that moment, I just let myself be. This is where I am right now. I need to just be attentive to where I am. I feel like every year at this time of year, as we ramp up, and it begins before Thanksgiving and it lasts through December 25th, we are going to get so caught up in trying to make everything perfect and match the holiday season with what this image is that we have in our brain, that we're going to forget to be present with whatever is. I've talked about it before. I'm pretty sure I even alluded to it in a sermon, but one of my favorite Christmas movies, my favorite, is Home Alone. It stands on its own. It is my favorite. But one of my other favorites is another comedy, The Christmas Vacation, with Chevy Chase in it. And what gets me is I totally identify with this dad who he's in the attic and he finds these old family movies of when he was a kid and playing in the snow, and he just has this idealized version of what Christmas should be, of what he remembers, which again, you kind of pick and choose what you remember. And he's trying to recreate that for his family, and none of it goes right? Like none of it. It's just one disaster after another. And again, he was so consumed with trying to make everything perfect that he wasn't really present with his family, that he missed out on things, on the joy, because he was so consumed with pursuing this vision that he had of what it needed to be, of what Christmas needed to be. And I think we can do the same thing in the church. And I know that, and I hear rumblings of that, because I know for many of you, church has shifted a lot in the last 2 years in the way that it looks and the way that we are. And there's a grief there that I just want to name. It's okay to grieve change. It's okay to grieve things about the church that aren't there anymore. That there is some things that have been lost, but there's also a lot of things that we're finding. And so I want to challenge you and I want to caution you a little bit, when you start having this vision of what your church should be, of what it should look like, of who should be sitting in the pews, of what the music should sound like, of what your pastor should be doing, of the people, I should be visiting or should be talking to or should be recruiting or should be this, to be careful. Because what you're doing is you have a vision of how you see the church. And that's not a bad thing. But when you only see that vision as the only way the church can be successful, you are missing out on what God is doing. You're missing out on what is present. You're missing out on who is showing up and the new people that are coming and the ways that we are doing things now that are working, that have never worked before. And the deepening faith that people are finding and the new ministries that we're doing. When you have a vision of this is the only way that my church can look, and this is the only way that we can measure success, instead of being present, and making judgments about whether or not the church is dying or living or thriving based on how well it fits that vision of what you have, you're missing out on what is really happening. Which, by the way, is some pretty incredible stuff. It's not a bad thing for us to always be pursuing being better, building up. I mean, we are Methodists, we talk about going on in perfection. And as a church, we should always be striving to do better, to do all the good we can, to do things as best we can, to be as authentic and transparent and just relentlessly pursuing God. But is that the vision that you have? Or is the vision a vision of all of your preferences of what you like? And your judgment for the church is how well it fits that. Because the more each of us tries to pursue our own visions of the church, and the church can't meet all of those. But what we can do is be present with one another, rejoice over what is happening, and continue to build on the very strong foundations and the very strong blueprints that we already have. God is moving. So this season, my challenge for you is hold the plans that you have loosely. Be willing to be interrupted by God, by your family. Don't schedule yourself so much that you run yourself ragged. Don't be like me and sit in the ER and decide, yep, I can work the next morning. So that's not healthy. Find ways to be present to the presence of God. If that means you need to slow down, slow down. I think God's telling me that. If that means letting go of this Hallmark vision of what this holiday season is going to look like, let it go. Because it doesn't have to be that way in order for it to be wonderful. So those are my 2 cents as I anticipate being gone for a little bit of time in my own recovery. Don't hesitate to challenge me on that as well. Like I said, this is a lesson I am constantly needing to learn. And know that as a preacher, I always preach to myself first. Most often, the sermons that hit home for you hit home for me. The unfortunate part is I can't get away from me. So if I've said it, I have to live it. So c'est la vie. So I hope that this finds you having a wonderful holiday weekend. And I hope to see you real soon. God bless.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of What's Going On, a podcast of First United Methodist Church in Yankton, South Dakota. We'd love to have you join us for worship on Wednesday nights at 6:15 or Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. You can also worship with us online at firstumcyankton.org or find us on YouTube.